In this video, I'm going to teach you how to make the most iconic piece of text-based exposition in movie history, the Star Wars opening crawl. Because there have been about 8 font, spacing, size, angle, and color combinations throughout the saga, I'm just going to stick to the one I think is the best looking, The Empire Strikes Back. To make it easier to follow along, I'll only be using fonts available on Adobe Fonts, and one that I made myself. So before getting started, make sure to activate Trade Gothic Next LT Bold, News Gothic Bold, and Nimbus Sans Bold. There's a link in the description for my font Newsflash, which is based on the font they used for the title in the real crawl. But if you don't want to use my font, which admittedly is still in beta, you can use Alternate Gothic Compressed ATF Regular, which is also on Adobe. There's also a link below for a PNG of the Star Wars logo, and then a couple of links to the Star Wars Fonts Twitter with info on what fonts they used in all the crawls, and a list I made of alternatives available on Adobe and Google Fonts. Okay, let's get started. I'll click here to make a new composition. I want to do this in 4K resolution, so I'll make my comp size 3840 by 1600 at 24 frames per second and make it 2 minutes long. First, I'm going to make my starfield. I'll add a new solid by going to Layer, New, Solid, and make it comp size, or, since you'll probably want it to tilt down at the end, make it taller than comp size. Go into your effects and grab Turbulent Noise and drag that onto the solid. Why Turbulent Noise over Fractal Noise? I don't know. I've just had better results with Turbulent Noise. Now, I obviously want my starfield to look like the one in Empire Strikes Back, but yours can look any way you want it to. I'm going to leave Fractal type on Basic and change Noise type to Linear. Up my contrast to 970 and take my brightness down to -225 because I don't want too many little tiny stars in there, but I want the bigger ones to be visible. Then I'll change my overflow to clip. Under transform, I want my scale to be 6, and then complexity at 2. Under subsettings, I want sub-influence to be 90, and sub-scaling to be 80. Now that's looking pretty good, but it's a little bright and a little too crisp. So grab a fast box blur and set radius to 1. I like to take it just a little further and also add a directional blur at 90 degrees and a length at 1. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it makes me feel like I'm getting that anamorphic lens look. Last thing I want to do to the starfield is put a tint on it, with black mapped to 02, 01, 05, and white mapped to BAC, EFF. And there we have it, a starfield like the one at the beginning of Empire. Okay, I'll bring my playhead to 28 seconds and trim the starfield to start there. This is just about where it comes up in the movie, and ideally you'll be lining it up to music, so this gives you space before it to fit the fanfare and the a long time ago screen. If you want to do those other elements in separate comps, just keep the stars at 0. I'm going to make another comp with the same settings as the first one, only I want this one to be 13 seconds long, and I'll call it Star Wars logo. In there, I'll make a new camera with a film size of 35, focal length 24. I'll enable depth of field, focus distance 600, aperture 20, f-stop 1.2, and blur level 50%. Now I'll grab the Star Wars logo, which I provided in the links, and place it under the camera. I'll click here to make it 3D, and then bring up position with P, and set the stopwatch on the first frame. Then I'll make a new keyframe at the end and change the Z position to 99,500. Because I'm doing this in 3D space and using a camera with a wide focal length, the motion doesn't look as linear as if I just scaled it down, but it's still going too fast at the beginning, so I'm going to go into the graph editor. I'll select position and click to separate dimensions. Now with the Z curve selected, I want it to look something like this. You can adjust it to taste, but maybe have it hover around the 50,000 mark a little before 10 seconds. You know, do your best. There aren't really any hard and fast rules here. Then I'll leave the graph editor and hit T to toggle opacity and go to the end of the clip, stopwatch set to 0, then go back 2 seconds, make another keyframe at 100% to make it fade out in space. I also want to simulate the lens distortion you see when the logo is close to the camera, so I'll make a new adjustment layer and add optics compensation set to 24. Now the logo is being cut off a little, so I'll add a grow bounds effect above optics compensation and set it to 100 just to be safe. Back in my original comp, I'll drag the Star Wars logo comp in and align it with the starfield. Okay, now I'm going to make another new comp, same width as before, but with a height of 11,000, and the duration doesn't matter. In fact, you don't even have to do this in a separate comp, but it does make it way easier to lay out the text. Okay, with the text tool, I'm going to drag out a text box as close as I can get it to the size of the comp. I want my font to be News Gothic Bold, size 270, line spacing 400. Now type out your crawl with episode number on the first line, title in all caps on the second, and then your paragraphs with an extra line space in between them, and it should look like this. I'll select the first 2 lines and center align them, then select just my title and change the font to Newsflash, the font I linked below. I'll make the size 780, change the leading to 1010, and just track it down so it fits on the line. Now, if you decided that my font sucks, you can just substitute alternate Gothic compressed ATF regular at 85% width. Now select the first line of the body text and change its line spacing to 880. Then select all 3 paragraphs and change them to justify last left. If you're recreating the crawl from one of the movies, you'll probably have to change the letter spacing in some of the lines to make the layout match, and there's some other options in the paragraph panel, so play around with those until you're happy with it. And the good news is I'll be using this text layer directly in the other comp, so I'll be able to edit it while it's at the right perspective and get a better feel for how it looks. I'll copy the text layer and paste it in my main comp and have it start at 39 seconds, or, if you kept your stars at the beginning of the comp, 11 seconds. It should overlap your Star Wars logo by about 2 seconds. Now bring up a frame where the Star Wars logo is visible, and with your text layer selected, use the eyedropper tool to match the color. You don't have to stick with the color I chose for this PNG, and I'll show you how to change it later. But for now, we need another camera. Again, go to Layer, New, Camera. I'm going to use the same settings as the logo camera, which I chose because John Knoll once said that the crawl was filmed with a 24mm lens, so I just started with that, went with a standard 35mm film size, and it all seemed right. Once again, make sure depth of field is enabled, distance 600, aperture 20, f-stop 1.2, and blur level 50%. Hit R to bring up orientation and set X to 69. I'll make the crawl text 3D by clicking this box, and then hit S to bring up the scale, which I'll set to 171%. But don't worry, it's text, so it won't pixelate. I want to make the duration of my crawl 1 minute 16 seconds, which will take it to 155, or, please stop making me do math, 127. I'll hit P to bring up position, and change the Y position until the top of the crawl is just below the frame. Click the stopwatch at the beginning of the clip, then go to the end and make a new keyframe, and after the Y position type minus 30,500, and that'll take it up to the end of its journey. As for the timing of the crawl, you want it to be about 40 to 45 frames from the top of one line to the top of the next. This doesn't have to be followed exactly as long as it's readable, but it can be accomplished in a few ways. You can change how far along the Y-axis it travels, you can change how long it takes to get from keyframe to keyframe, or, even though I think the constant motion looks just fine, I have noticed that the real crawls speed up about 3/4 of the way through when the bottom line is around the middle of the screen. So if you want, you can go back into the graph editor, convert to Bezier, and just pull that right handle up a little bit. Just don't overdo it. Now back on the text layer, I'm going to bring up opacity, go to the end and click the stopwatch, set to 0%. Then go back 4 seconds and bring it back up to 100. That should give us a good fade out as it's moving, but that's not what it should look like. So I'll make a new adjustment layer, or solid, either is fine, and add a gradient ramp to it. I'll set the start Y position to 40, then set the end of the ramp to Y300. Then on your text layer, set the track matte to Luma matte for the adjustment layer. Now it looks like it's fading into space. I also want that same lens distortion I put on the logo, so I'll just grab optics compensation again, put it directly on the text layer so it doesn't affect the star field, set to 24, and it's getting cut off again, so I'll put grow bounds above that and set to 100. And look at that, you've got a logo and a crawl. But we're not done, not even a little bit. We need to tell people when the story takes place. So I've got my text tool, and I'll click to do regular point type, and type out a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Then I'll set my font to Trade Gothic Next LT Bold, size 185, line spacing 260, and tracking at 50. If you want, you can select the dots and increase their tracking to 200 or so, and then center it up. Set the color to something like 21B 1cc. Trim the start to 22 seconds and the end to 27 seconds, or if you didn't leave space, do this in a new comp with a duration of 5 seconds. It fades in and out, so I'm going to toggle the opacity with T and click the stopwatch at the beginning. The dissolve is 12 frames long, so I'll go forward 12 frames, set another keyframe, and take the first one down to 0. Then I'll do the same for the end. Now, I don't think that I can legally suggest that you put the 20th Century Fox and Lucasfilm logos at the start of your movie, but the way I see it, we've got 22 seconds of dead air at the start of this comp, and I really like that old green Lucasfilm logo. So I'm going to get my text tool again and type something like a Star Wars fonts production and center align it. I'm using Nimbus Sans Bold for this, but you can just as easily use Helvetica Bold or really any bold sans typeface. I'm going to make the top and bottom lines size 165 with a line spacing of 180, and then the middle one size 240 with a line spacing of 250. And I'll set the tracking for the whole thing at -25. Then I'll set the color to something like 25A529. Bring the playhead to 11 seconds and trim the clip to start there, then go to 20 seconds and trim the end. Or, if you're doing this in a separate comp, just make it 9 seconds. Then I'll bring up the opacity and do a 12-frame dissolve on each side. The spacing between all these elements can be adjusted based on the needs of your project, the music you choose, or just personal preference. Maybe you like a bit less room between Lucasfilm and a long time ago. Easy. As for what goes in that first 11 seconds, well, that's up to you, pal. So those are the basics, but it's all looking a little too crisp for a movie that came out in 1980. Time for our effects. This part of the tutorial is going to be a lot more subjective, so I'm just going to walk you through some of the looks that work for me, but as always, I encourage you to take what I do here and make it your own. I'll start with a long time ago. I'm going to add a simple choker set at 5 to make it less bold and round out the corners a bit. Then I want to glow after that. I want to composite the original on top and leave the glow on add. Then, to get the color I like, I'll put the threshold on 70, and then the radius on 15 and the intensity to 0.6. And the final touch is to add a fast box blur set to 2. And I think that looks great. Then I'm just going to copy these effects and paste on the Lucasfilm logo and change the glow threshold to 50 so it shows up a little better. I'll copy those same effects to the Star Wars logo, change the matte to 1 so it doesn't look too weird as it gets smaller, and change the glow threshold to 80 to make the edges a little redder and take the radius down to 10. Then I'll copy just the glow and the blur and paste those onto the crawl layer below the optics compensation I added earlier. I have to think how the text will look up close and as it blurs out far away, so I'm going to reduce the glow a little, taking threshold down to 78 and the radius down to 5. Then I want to put a refined hard matte just before the glow. I'll take down the contrast to 60 and shift edge to 70 to make the text look just a little bolder. This isn't perfect, but I really like the way it looks as it fades. As for the color of the logo I gave you, maybe you like your crawl a little less yellow. Easiest way is to just get color balance. I like the HLS one, or you can just use hue and saturation. Take the hue down a little and maybe saturation up to 60. Or be a pioneer and do the whole thing in blue. Then just select your crawl layer again, grab the eyedropper and sample the logo, and you got a blue crawl. And I know a lot of people are interested in giving the whole thing a more filmic look, something more alive feeling. So I'm going to give it a little gate weave, that subtle film shake. I could do this in an adjustment layer, but I don't want the later elements in the starfield to have the same weave, so I'll just do it per layer. So I'm going to hit A to bring up anchor point, option click the stopwatch and type wiggle 24 times per second, 1 pixel. You can always make it less drastic. I think 0.6 looks really nice, just sort of a hint of movement. And because this isn't real film, it doesn't necessarily have to move on each frame, so you can take the frequency down to 18 or 12 frames to just sort of soften the effect a little. And then you can just copy and paste that expression onto your other elements. And the finishing touch, I'm going to add a new adjustment layer over everything, and under noise and grain, I'll choose add grain. I like the Eastman color negative preset set to monochromatic with the intensity taken down a little, say to 0.5. It'll take a little while to render when you set the viewing mode to final output, but I think it adds just what your crawl needs to look real. And that's it. You have a crawl. And I think it looks great. Hopefully yours turned out just as well. When you assemble everything and put your music in, just make sure the theme starts right at this frame. Now, obviously, I based this crawl on The Empire Strikes Back, but like I said, each movie has its own combination of fonts and angles and spacing. so I'll likely do a follow-up video to explore those. As for the contents of your call, if you're looking to write your own, my friend Auric Fonts over on Twitter wrote a really cool guide in his Aurebesh Quarterly zine, which is a pretty great read. I even wrote a piece for it, so I'm linking that below. And make sure to follow me on Twitter at Star Wars Fonts and subscribe here for, hopefully, more Star Wars type-related projects. Thanks for watching.